So the economic crime bill went through the House on Monday. I don't know if any of you happened to watch it live. I watched a bit of it live, but this is a good first step. I will say this is a good first step towards something really going forward and tackling this problem. And I think it's been long, long overdue that this problem has not been tackled. And remember, this goes all the way back to like when David Cameron first entered office, saying that this and the House of Lords were going to be the two greatest scandals he predicted of his time in office. And to a lesser extent, he has been proved right on this. And while this is a first good step, and it is, I think it enters the Lords today. While this does have a lot of good stuff that does provide, again, a lot of those first steps, you're sensing, you can hear it coming because there is a but coming. And the big but is, unfortunately, there are lots of a couple of loopholes that really need to be sorted to really make this economic crime bill really, really solid. But I worry unless there is serious amendments in the House of Lords, these aren't going to really go through. So that probably means that we will have to go back in the future and pass some of these amendments again to make this economic crime bill stronger. So it's going to have to be the economic crime bill part 2. So that is something that we are going to have to do. And again, I think it's a good thing for Labour to campaign on in the future to really strengthen this, saying, oh, look, we've got this, but the problem is it doesn't go far enough, or we missed out key things that were needed to do in, partly because they wanted to rush this through. And yeah, it is mainly that rush through that's probably caused some of these loopholes, but that's politics sometimes. that's how it happens. So as always, before we do go jumping into this, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can, buy me a coffee. And as always, there are the YouTube memberships open down below as well. So, on with this. So, this comes from The Guardian with the title of The Oligarch's Guide to Getting Around the UK's Economic Crime Bill. The economic crime bill being debated today in the House of Lords does not, as the Home Secretary Priti Patel insisted, show Britain's determination to root out Vladimir Putin's mob of oligarchs and kleptocrats. On the contrary, it demonstrates the ingrained complacency towards dirty money that is so complete it begins to resemble complicity. This bill does tweak the sanctions regulations to remove some of the bottlenecks that have made the UK lag behind its allies. And it does update the rules around the unexplained wealth orders to fix some of the flaws in the last measure that was supposedly going to tame the oligarchy. What makes the bill important, however, is the fact that it does impose transparency on offshore companies that own property in the UK. This is why the legislation is so urgent. It was rushed through the House of Commons in a single day on Monday, a process that would normally take months. If the plan works as intended, oligarchs will no longer be able to anonymously own mansions and estates. Their secrets will be revealed, and they will either scuttle away like cockroaches from an overturned rock or face prosecution from our brave police officers. Britain will cease to be a willing fence for stolen wealth of the world, a butler to the Kremlin's cronies. However, there is just one problem with the plan. That is that it is useless unless some astonishing amendments appear out of nowhere. It's completely rubbish. If you're an oligarch and you want to completely legally way around to avoid all the provisions in this bill, you own an offshore company and it equals shares of at least 16.617% with all 5 close relatives. That way, your shareholders reach around 25% level of the ownership required to count as a person of significant control. Here is another way to also legally own your own company via professional corporate trust provider who will then act as nominee and thus be named in your place on the ownership documents. You're welcome. And it's not even a lawyer, but I imagine what a skilled enabler could do with this colander of masquerading as a single piece of legislation. And of course, here's another illegal way to evade these new measures. Just provide false information. And again, this is the first one I can understand because it's quite complicated, but this one, yeah. There are no checks on information that the shell companies owners have to declare. So if an oligarch was prepared to lie, and if there's anything we've learned about the Kremlin is that they are prepared to lie, they could pretend that they just didn't own the property at all. And then this should not be a surprise to the Home Office because it's exactly the same loophole for decades, which has led to British registered companies with falsified ownership being used to hide the ownership of billions upon billions of pounds laundered out of Russia. But Patel even appeared to realize that her bill even had flaws because addressing the Commons on Monday, she spoke almost as much about the second economic crime bill as she intends to introduce as she did about this one. She said the government was hurrying this legislation forward so to send a very strong signal to the UK will not be a home for corruption. And to anyone who's been following this issue, however, this signal sends exactly the opposite message. The British government first promised this very policy on offshore-owned property back in 2016 when David Cameron hosted an anti-corruption summit. The necessary legislation was published back in 2018 following a full consultation when Theresa May was Prime Minister. It has been sitting on a shelf now for almost 4 years. The need to hurry it through Parliament was created solely by the government's own failure to introduce it earlier. Expecting to be congratulated for that is like demanding plaudits for running for the bus because you've overslept. If the government did actually care about oligarchs owning Belgravia, rather than about the bad headlines, it would have passed this bill with proper scrutiny years ago. Of course, if the government does need to introduce and indeed bring in a second, the better economic crime bill, as Patel would say, that's all for good. There are, however, reasons to doubt this newfound commitment to this cause. It is less than 2 months since the first annual actual minister resigned at the dispatch box in the House of Lords over the government's decision to not introduce this very same economic crime bill. Back when in 2016, Scottish MPs drew ministers' attention to the flaws in the rules around the House of Commons and how they had allowed the so-called Moldovan laundromat to wash dirty money through Edinburgh. The registered limited partnerships, the government's response was to delegate further so that it could protect the competitiveness of the City of London. Even so, the few new measures that are introduced to the national crime industry and the Serious Fraud Office are still dangerously underfunded. And of course, the lack of people, resources, and political cover to go after further financial criminals wherever and whoever they might be. This bill does indeed limit the costs that targets of the unexpected wealth orders can now claim back from the NHC after an unsuccessful filing. But that just restricts how much money it can lose. It doesn't give it any new resources to fund new investigations. Again, this was talked about in the bill on Monday that we need to fund these people because, again, part of this goes back to Tory austerity that took funds away from this. And of course, tackling the oligarchs is if tackling the oligarchs is suddenly urgent because Putin has invaded Ukraine. But when this crisis is over, which hopefully it will be soon, I do not believe Boris Johnson will keep waving the flag. He's a man who has dismissed the Intelligence and Security Committee's sober warnings about the Russian interference and moans of the Islington Remainers. Would you really bet against the lobbyists for deregulating the managing to persuade his government that now is not the time to impose tighter restrictions on property sales or company formations? Overcoming Britain's willingness to take money from anyone and anywhere, and will take more than one day's hurried debate. And I see no sign that this government will ever begin to actually realise the scale of this changes to legislation to enforce the culture and politics that are really required to rid this country of its very bad habit. So this is obviously, I said at the beginning, it's a step in the right direction. And I'm glad that this has been a step in the right direction. This bill has been a long time coming. But we need now a second economic crime bill. More importantly, of course, we need to fund the correct authorities, the national crime agencies, to be able to go after, these people with this hidden wealth. That's what they need. They need those resources. But again, the Tories haven't funded those people. The other thing that was talked about on Monday as well was in America, if like the FBI or CIA go after something very similar, they actually get to keep some of that money that gets reinvested back into their organization. I think that will be a fantastic way for the National Crime Agency to have as well. I also think it's incredibly wrong that these companies can then sue the National Crime Agency for any money lost during this investigation. Again, that hampers their ability to be able to do that. I do not think you should be able to do that. Now, you can say, oh, well, we suffered damage and, we were proved right. Well, congratulations, you were proved right. Go on and do business. You do not have a right to go and sue an agency that was investigating you to essentially prove your innocence. I do not think that is right, that they should be allowed to do that. But again, this is why a second economic crime bill, which again I think we should definitely be pushing for down the lines, and definitely start the conversation about this happening now and what needs to go into it, really needs to be started as soon as possible. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.